Hello, dear audience. We are back, and we have promised to continue the topic about love that endlessly evolves and gets better and better, I would say, and we go to different directions, and we try to withdraw answers from the darkest corners of life to figure out what's going on in this section of a human life. What can be done about that? And how can you explain a behavior like this? And everything comes and ends, finds its end in love. And as we promised, I'll try to ask questions, Presbyter Akiyaki, about the qualities of love. Because we know that we love ourselves very much, sometimes more than we should. And we love our children, we love our pets, we love our family members, our closest relatives, our extended family, our neighborhood people, and we don't want any of them to be harmed. And then it goes further and further, and the further we go, the lesser our loves get. We don't love our enemies, even though Christ says, love your enemies. If you love your relatives, your friends, what good are you doing? Because everybody does that. You want or not, you love your kid, or your spouse, or your mother, or your father, but you love your enemy, and show me that you have love. So I would like today, Presbytera, if possible, to explain these qualities of love. Are they really love? When we want our kids to go to the best university, and we spend our entire wealth and time and energy on it, and then they become criminals. Is this love? What kind of stages of love exist that a human being goes through and eventually reaches to saintly love that loves God and everything else is included in it?
As usual, Arkady, you say a few sentences that are loaded, that we can go in many directions. And I appreciate that. I just want to share again with the audience that we really are having a conversation. We are friends for a long time, and we come prepared with notes on the topic that we are hoping to share with each other. At the same time, we don't read from our notes. We don't come in with a canned presentation. We really are just talking.
You're speaking from your heart, and you say what you are and what you think at the moment, no matter who is listening to you.
Whenever there's an agenda, there is a lack of love. Because if it's an agenda, let's define it here. It is a goal or a direction that we are choosing, that we are investing our attention to, our commitment to. It energizes us. We want it, we desire this. And it's something that leads us away from the love of God.
Okay.
Anything. And so if we accuse anyone of having an agenda, we have to be careful, because we have to look at ourselves. Do I have an agenda here that is outside of the will of God, outside of the love of God? And so if someone is raising their children so that they can go to the universities, the best universities, and there is an agenda, and then you said earlier about, oh, what happens if they become criminals? Well, then, isn't that interesting? That maybe there was more happening in the home than we realized. And so am I saying don't try to encourage your children to become the best they can be? Of course not. Am I saying don't encourage your children to, especially in our society, to grow, to learn, to be good students, to learn? I, Kyriaki, would err on the side of more education than less, just so that there's more ways of being flexible in the future, so that however the world may be changing, my child or I will have more possibilities of earning a dignified living. So having a good education is a good thing, but is the agenda something that bears witness to another God rather than the living God? Or is my desire to help my children, my friends' children, the children I know, and to become their best selves so they can do good? Mm-hmm. Right? That would be more pleasing to God. So an agenda is something that's a goal that's not pleasing to the love of God. You asked earlier in the previous episode and began today with ideas about what are some of the characteristics of love.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to remind everyone that we have been discussing a trilogy of qualities: faith, hope, and love. And that St. Paul writes in Corinthians, in many places, but in Corinthians, about there are only three things that will be eternal, and that is faith, hope, and love. And that these are three interrelated qualities, but in a sense they build on one another also. So it all begins with faith. And what's another word for faith? Trust.
Mm-hmm.
And so trust in the living God, trust in the love of God. What is faith? Well, once we start trusting, our faith is tested in ways and takes us places we never, ever expected. So in a sense, faith is on the opposite continuum of experience, in the sense of the trust takes us to places we've never been, and we still continue from there, looking forward into an unknown future where God abides, and that's the direction we keep looking. That's faith. Faith is another level of walking that first has to start with trust. And then the final part of that journey is love. And that's why when St. Paul writes about faith, hope, and love, and in the end says love is the most important. It's the most, I want to say it's the most enduring, but it is the most preeminent of the three. It is because that is, in a sense, what this whole dynamic is working toward. Our being in the love of God, God being all in all. That means at some point in human history that according to our understanding as Christians, the love of God will be manifested visibly in ways the whole universe knows that it's there, and that love, His presence will be all in all, and we will be all in one with Him. What does that mean? That's another topic of another discussion. But this is the love that's already saturating the universe anyway in some mysterious way, that every place in the cosmos is saturated by this love of God, that even between us, the space between us is saturated by the love of God. Well, how come I don't feel it? Well, it's because through my own free will, I wind up getting distracted. My own free will. And also, life is hard. We get distracted, even if my own free will is looking in the right direction, life is hard. We live in a fallen world where there is pain, where it's hard. There are very few people living in this world long enough who will not say life is easy. There maybe are some people who will, even Jesus said, there are some people here today who will not taste death until I come. Well, I think it means, yeah, there's some people who have a really pretty good life until the Lord takes them. But that's not the majority. The majority of us will probably experience life as being tough.
And it's interesting that he refers to John, and he's considered the apostle of love. He speaks most about love in his gospel. That's interesting connection, that he didn't die, meaning he always kept the love.
He was faithful to the love even when he was persecuted, even when he was thrown in exile on the island of Patmos. And even then he kept walking in the direction of growing in love with Christ, and Christ visited him, where he was able to write his final work, which was the Apocalypse, the Revelation, that is also part of the Bible.
Yes. After our discussions, I also come to an understanding that if there is love, then everything else is in their places. Love guides you to go where you have to go.
This you're pointing to an ancient Christian teaching that most often was said by Saint Seraphim of Sarov, who was a saint who lived in Russia in the 19th century. But the same expression goes back to as early as the 2nd century, and I wish I had written it down, but I found an early saint saying identically the same thing, which was, acquire the spirit of peace, and thousands around you will be saved. It's not just peace in the sense of being cut off from the world and making a sort of cold distance from others. I'm peaceful because I'm cut off from you. But it's a kind of connection to ourselves in the presence of the other, capital O, God. And that connects us to the love of God, the loving God. And so to acquire the spirit of peace, as we said earlier, is founded in the soil of humility, being supple and surrendering our own grandiosity, our own preconceived notions about how great we are outside of God and in comparison to others. When we compare ourselves, you know, me against you, me against other people, or when I compare someone against someone else, first of all, that's shaming. And second of all, we are actually working antithetically to love. It's one thing to gauge ourselves, how we're doing, and that's one of the few, we talked about the slippery slope of comparisons. You know, it's one thing to make a quick check to see how we're doing for our own self in the presence of God. But that slope is very slippery, where we start comparing you against me and one another, and the assumption is someone wins and someone loses. In the love of God, that never happens.
When we read the ancient stories about love or the poetry, we find that people loved each other so strongly that nothing could separate them, even death. And this comes proof that the opposite of love is death. There was love and death, that they chose one of this. If they couldn't reach their love, they died. And in one of the ancient stories, I remember two people love each other and the society destroys the love, and it happens that they bury them together on their backs, like usually. And later on, maybe years later, they dig the grave and they see that they turn towards each other in the grave. Maybe this sounds mythical, sounds unreal, but it shows the greatness of love. Even after death, they didn't give up each other.
Yesterday, I came home early and I was making dinner, and I've never in my whole life seen a whole episode, until I haven't. I saw half an episode of Judge Judy. I've never seen a whole episode, but I saw half an episode of Judge Judy. And I really liked her, you know, because she's very no-nonsense, and I can see why she has a big following. And in this episode, I guess she oversees several cases, and at least 20 minutes of the last 30 minutes of the show, as I was running back and forth making my dinner, she was listening to two sides of two young people who they moved in with each other. In moving in, he was somehow wanting to buy more furniture, and he asked the new girlfriend, could you help me buy the furniture and help me buy the big screen TV, because I don't have any money. And she said, sure, we'll put it on my credit card and you just make payments. So they did. And to make a long story short, they broke up within a few months. He stops paying, and then she gets a new boyfriend. And in the end, he tries to convince Judge Judy that he did the right thing because, well, I was paying until she met this other guy, and then now that they're together, I accept the furniture and the big screen TV as a gift. And he said this on TV, and I'm thinking, this is insanity. And so, because we have become short-sighted in our relationships. Where's his definition of God? I won't go, and her definition of God. What was happening for them to make these decisions to move in to begin with? And so there's a whole faulty relationship with reality that they were just operating out of, that we are living in our society now, that we need to question.
So we are speaking now about absence of love.
That's right. It's an absence of love, chasing a secondary or fake love or immature love or other dynamics masquerading as love. We need to take steps back and start looking at what we're doing.
Last week I was talking to one of my friends who is a politician. Somehow we came to a discussion about church having power over society. They say that in former Soviet Union, right in the beginning, when the Soviets started, there was an argument between the clergy and a godless politician about who has more influence on the people. And they came out to a public square, there were people gathered, and the politician came out and made a good speech, very short but very good speech, and people were just listening to him. And when it was the priest's turn, he came out, it was the Pascha time. So all he had to say is, Christ is risen. And the entire crowd responded to him, truly he is. And the politician was stunned because he realized that one word and the entire nation will respond to the church. Because they believe in God, and this is who leads the faith. And now, this politician I was talking to, he said that in our society, the statistics show that the church does not have power anymore. There are bigger forces than the religion. Now, I want to connect this with the fact that our young people make commitment over a big screen TV or 2-year cell phone plan. If we have the fact that the church faith has lost influence over the society, that means that it's not nourishing that society. It means that the society has lost faith. And the result of this comes out around this kind of commitments. Do you think, or do you have different explanation for it?
I think these are important observations you're making, but they're sweeping. They're very broad strokes that you're making right now. And so it's too soon to say what kind of influence the church will have. What do we mean by church? Do we mean the church leadership? Do we mean the people? Do we mean the prayers themselves? As Orthodox Christians, we believe that the church is where the Holy Spirit of God abides. And so God's not done with us yet. God's not done with any of us yet. And so to write off God through the church is premature. At the same time, people in the church and outside the church can make decisions about what is life and true life in ways that are not pleasing to God. And so that is not infectious in a good way. It could hurt people. We wind up chasing other priorities that give us status or make us feel important. We can be chasing power. We can be chasing excitement. We can be chasing money. We can be chasing many things as a substitute for love and authentic relationships with one another. And so, but when we go any of these directions, one of the first byproducts of this is pride, meaning the desire to be God without God. And when we do that, we become less humble in the sense of being right-sized. Either we're too big, trying to chase these new priorities, or too small, being humiliated, feeling we don't have a life, we don't deserve, or we won't get a break in life. And oftentimes in humiliation, we can be broken, or in humiliation, we can be broken and defiant in a way that maybe will save our life, but if we stay there, can also harden us. And so how do we cultivate a heart of flesh, the kind of flesh that God wants us to have, a heart of flesh, a soft heart, so that we can perceive Him, His love for us and one another in our daily activities. Mm-hmm. This is not an easy thing. I went to get my hair cut the other day at a new place, and the young woman who was, it was a new place. I needed, one of these inexpensive places in and out so I could go back to work. And the young woman, very intelligent, very thorough at her job, started a conversation with me. And I could tell that, I don't know what her ethnic background was. If I were to guess, it was a mixed background, ethnic-wise, but I don't know. And she asked, why are you in such a hurry? What do you do? And I said, well, I have a couple of levels of life here, and I'm being interviewed with a friend on that's being filmed the next day. I didn't want to say anything more than that. And well, what are you being interviewed on? She asked me. And I said, well, it's a series on faith, hope, and love, and tomorrow we're going to be talking about love. And then there was dead silence. And then I almost felt her getting cold. And I didn't like telling her what I was talking about because I just had an intuition that I must have looked like a very successful businesswoman in the community because I was kind of dressed for my private practice office, and so I came in kind of dressed for work. And my guess was, because she gave me a little bit of a hint of her background, that she may have been a single mother, struggling to raise 2 children, and God knows what ethnic or racial issues she had to survive just to be able to get to work that day to make money for her children. And the conversation ended when I said love. And in my heart, and I wanted to say something and I didn't know what to say, but in my heart I wanted to ask her forgiveness, to say, I don't know how to love. And I want to learn. And I want to change my life so that I can be more real with you and be your sister, wherever that is, the next time I see you. Mm-hmm. And so I left at least asking God for help that day to be more sensitive to the sisters and brothers across my path that I can so easily rush past in my important life that I'm trying to lead.
I'm going to share a similar story. It happened yesterday. When I had to close the store, this young girl that is working next to me, she asked me if I'm off tomorrow. I said, yes, I'm off. And she says, what are you going to do tomorrow on your day off? I said, I have a TV show I have to go. And then she says, what is the show about? Before I had to say something, she already knew a little bit about me. And is it about God? I said, well, kind of, yeah. And I tried to pursue and say, well, if you want to know what is it about, it's on your town's local access television. You can go and watch it. She's like, no, if it wasn't about God, I would probably, but maybe when I'm bored, I will give a glance to it. I wasn't offended because she's not watching my program. Honestly, I wasn't. But I felt horrible that working with her so long, almost 4 or 5 months, I haven't had silence influence. Because part of being Christian is to influence people without words. Like I always remember, and Kelly always mentioned this to me, about Francis of Assisi, that he has the famous expression, let's preach love and use words if necessary. So I felt similarly that I haven't shown love, I haven't shown faith, and I haven't shown that because I believe in God, that God is great. Not because that God is great anyways, but because I believe in that God, and that God has a relationship with me, and through that relationship I am who I am, and that's because of that God. So I haven't become a bridge for anybody around me to that God, and I witness that God with my life.
Be careful, because our tradition talks about, if I can stop you here,
sure,
to make you, and maybe me, but more you, feel a little bit better, that we don't know the good we do. 90% of the time, we're not supposed to know, according to our spiritual tradition, we're not supposed to know the good we do, because it's none of our business, actually. The good that we do is supposed to, God will use in His own way. And every now and then, if we get a whiff of it, maybe for our own encouragement or for our own orientation to keep our eyes on the prize, which is the love of God and growing in God and love of neighbor, that's a good thing. But 90% of the time, we're not supposed to. So you don't know. It's still too soon for you and for me, and maybe we won't know till the end of time. But to know what good these exchanges did, and you are going back to work, and the relationship will still continue. So you still don't know what seeds have been planted from before, what new seeds are being planted between the two of you as of your conversation yesterday, and how things will go forward. Just like with me, if I dare have the courage to go back to that haircutting place and have the honor of having that woman cut my hair again, I don't know. Maybe she won't even remember me because she's very, very good and I'm very popular, I'm sure. But I think just by being struck or having my heart torn in this way, and maybe you too, this is not a bad thing to make me more sensitive. Maybe this is helping make my heart of flesh, my heart of lead, just a little softer after that exchange. Because yes, there was a tape in my head saying, you know, if I were her and I saw this lady, you know, in my seat talking about love, thinking, what do you know? What do you know when I have to face a society which drains me of my life and love every day in ways you'll never understand because of your white privilege? What do you know? I mean, maybe she wasn't thinking that, but there was a part of me taking that perspective on her behalf. And am I asking God for help? Am I asking God to help me grow so that I can be a real sister to her and to others who cross my path, to whom I'm accountable?
I want to emphasize the other side. I don't want to find an excuse for anyone, because I see a lot of bureaucracy, hypocrisy in the society, and sometimes it's explained away. But there is this wonderful example from, I believe it's 10th century, one of the patriarchs of Armenian Church goes to the Arabic king. The king was very friendly with him, so he invites him for, I think this was their first meeting, and then they become friends later on. And before he has to go, well, first of all, he was very known for his ascetic life. But before he has to go to the king, he puts on his big beard, puts powder of gold, puts his best clothes, golden chains, crosses, and every decoration that a patriarch can have. And then he visits the king. And then when they meet, the first question that the king had to him is, "Your Holiness, I have heard about your prophet. And I know that he preached poverty. He preached humility. He preached gentleness and all these wonderful things, and I like it. But when I look at you, I don't see any of those things. Look at your beard. It's all covered with gold, and all your clothes. How do you explain this?" Well, he says there are two explanations. And also the king mentions, he says, "I also have studied his disciples, his first disciples, the church fathers, and they were all ascetics living in the desert in poverty. And look at you, 10 centuries after, look at you." And the patriarch says, well, there are two explanations for this. First is that those disciples of Christ who were honest with themselves and with the society, and they were the way that they were, is because the Holy Spirit dwelled in them directly, and they didn't see anything else but Christ and the relationship with God, and they didn't care about anything else. I lack that. I'm sorry for that. And the second thing, I will tell you the reason I'm dressed like this. If you tell everybody in the room to leave the room, and it will be just me and you. And the king does whatever he asked, and they say that the patriarch takes off his clothes. And there was coat on his bare skin made of goat's skin, and the skin part inside and the fuzz outside, which was the time's ascetic clothes to strengthen their love and to draw their attention away from the world. And they say that the king was stunned. He didn't know what to say. And he said that because I was visiting you, who is a person of the world, I had to come in worldly clothes to honor you and put this, but the real clothes are inside. And I don't want to show you that I am who am I, how I live. And I don't want your people around you to know who is visiting you. I am the patriarch of this nation, and I have to come up appropriate way. So this is the other side of the coin. I think that sometimes we make decisions about other people, looking at them like, oh, such a hypocrite. But we don't know really who they are.
We are told not to judge.
Yes. And I don't want you to feel too bad, because knowing you and knowing that the lady doesn't know you.
I think it means to trust the path under our feet. We had said in an earlier visit together that we are all in the center of the palm of God's hand, referring to the providence of God. And what is the providence of God? God is a paradox that intellectually we cannot understand or comprehend, but that God completely respects human free will, absolutely. And at the same time, everything is within his power. Everything is unfolding according to his plan to the end of time, whatever that means. How are these true at the same time? Complete respect for freedom, and everything is in the center of the palm of God's hand, unfolding as scheduled as he wants? I don't know, but both are happening at once. And so for all of us to recognize that the path of God is still under our feet, and that people come into our lives, whoever they may be, the taxi driver, the person who is ringing us up at the checkout counter, the person who is bagging our bags at the checkout counter, person at the cell phone store helping us place an order, our teachers, our comrades, and the stranger that happens to cross our path. All of these persons, in one way or other, have been placed before us through the love of God. And for us to respond as best and peacefully as we know how accordingly.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned about the taxi driver, and it brought a memory. I want to share, I share with all my friends this story, and I would like to share with the audience. Charlie Chaplin writes a letter to his daughter, who was a famous dancer, actress. And he says, he gives many very good suggestions how she has to be as a proper woman and good professional artist. And he teaches her how to combine those two things. He says, you don't mix them up. When you live, he says, even very openly, he says, you can take off your clothes on the stage, but when you leave the stage, put your clothes on, go home. And one of the suggestions that he gives to her is, you take a taxi home. And when you come out of the taxi to go to your home, remember that you have climbed up in the society and you are all taken care of as an actress. But don't forget about the taxi driver, that he has a family and it's a late night, you're going home from a restaurant or something, but he's working. And the reason he's on the road, not in his house, is because he has kids and he doesn't have enough. So open your pocketbook and give him an extra so he can go home 15 minutes early. This is a wonderful story. I love this letter. I read it over and over. That shows that every single small thing in life is important. And if somebody doesn't know about small things, doesn't understand the importance of the small things, cannot understand the bigger things. Again, our blessed memory patriarch was bringing the example of the watch. He said, if you put a stone, big stone, on top of a watch, that watch is going to work. It's not going to stop. But the small dust, small particles of dust, and the moisture getting into the watch eventually will stop that watch, will corrode it, get in between the working parts, and this comes to show us that the small things are more important than the bigger things. And as the example of a taxi driver and many other examples that you brought today, I would like to emphasize this part to our audience, that small things are very important, and love matters in the small things. Love between loving couple and love between a saint and a god. Can you compare those things? Can you say that they are, like you said in the early examples, that this saint, the woman in Russia, loved so much her family and everybody else. But this, I want to compare these two types of love. Love for one another and love for God. Because Christ says, no one has greater love than the one who lays his life down for others. And in married life, as everybody knows who are married or getting started to get married, if there is no self-sacrifice, the family cannot last. This is very modern nuance for this topic, and you are relating with this kind of issues and problems as a psychologist. Can you compare these two and say what are the nuances and how much sacrifice does the family life demand? How much sacrifice does God demand from us as a loving person?
Well, remember, it's all about the same thing, our abiding in the presence of the love of the living God, thrice holy. And so you mentioned earlier ascetics, holy saints in the life of the church, who have lived through history and who are still among us now through various parts of the world, and people called to marital love. And there are many other millions of people not in those categories yet, whom God also loves. And we're all called to love. And that is the self-sacrificial giving that is done in wisdom. It is not throwing ourselves away. It is also valuing who we are in the presence of God. So it's care for self, love for self. And so not selfish, which is different. You know, self-love as the sin versus care for self, treating ourselves with the love and care God desires us to treat ourselves with, so that we can grow in Him and give Him glory and share the love with others, and share His love with others. And so I think I don't want, be careful. Let me just, I know you don't do this, but there are many, especially in the traditional Christian world, I would say especially in the Orthodox world, that will fall into the trap of trying to pit marital love and someone following Christ through marriage, yes, and someone following Christ as a monk or nun. And the issue, and yes, there are, through the centuries, people, because they're happy with what God has called them to, who will say, well, my call is superior to the other. And usually it's the monastic literature that remains now, and so we read that a lot. That
the married people didn't have time to write down there about happiness.
Exactly, you know, but there were more distractions in the married life, and so, but there are also many distractions in any life, and so we have to follow the vocation and life to which we've been called. And so in marital love, when it's lived truly and authentically, yes, sacrifice, self-sacrifice, being honest with ourselves in the presence of God and with our spouse is at the heart of everything. And we live in a society that, as you said, which it drains love, which distracts us from this reality. But in the Eastern Christian tradition, especially in the Eastern Christian tradition, for us, when marital love becomes what it's called to be, not only grows on earth, but also grows in the kingdom. We don't stop being ourselves in the kingdom. We are still ourselves. And so the people whom we love, especially our spouses, but everybody, we will still be ourselves, growing in Christ and one another. And so we believe that when marital love continues to grow as it's supposed to, it's eternal, and it's a gift of God for in the kingdom and will abide through the kingdom. When people are following God in other ways, for example, in a life of monastic community, that also is for the sake of the kingdom. And so to try to pit one against the other is very dangerous. And again, we were talking earlier about comparing as a way to, you know, it's one thing to get a sense of self, sort of where do I stand vis-a-vis everybody else. That's okay to do it briefly. But anything more than a brief snapshot check is a slippery slope into comparison, into shaming, into being one putting down the other, and that's dangerous. Now, the only exception as an Orthodox I would say to that is if someone were to be way down the path in maturity in Christ and in holiness, which happens as a mystery that evolves in that person's life, then that person, in a sense, is superior and can offer guidance to others. And so that often happens in monastic tradition. And you will find, as I was mentioning earlier, St. Juliana, this does happen within the marital condition also. But because of the distractions that love somehow brings, that might be slower, and that's okay, as long as we're looking and going in the right direction.
We spoke about the eternal, about authentic love, about God's divine love. Can you, with a couple words, explain and show that everyone has a chance, and no matter how bad we get, how drained through the society and through the life we get, we still have a chance that is knocking our door?
And I think you said it nicely. My experience, because of my work in the church, my work in theology, my work in psychology, my work in trying to be a friend, my work in striving to grow as someone trying to be real in the presence of God, however that is, it's all about second chances. We believe in a God of second chances. And that, yes, the story of Jesus at the cross that even at the very last minute, that one of the thieves was with Jesus in paradise that same day. That's an astounding thing to think about. If people are listening to our conversation, number one, I want to thank them for their patience and kindness, because it really is a conversation, and even we don't know what we're going to say next. But that if something is moving or stirring in their hearts, if something is bothering them or us, that's not a bad thing. Like I said earlier with the woman that cut my hair, I could have been making all that up, but if there's an element of truth to what I said, and that I left wounded, I didn't leave wounded for a bad reason. I left wounded for the sake of love. And that wound, I hope, will help me become a better person and treat the next people I engage with more love, and to ask God for help, and to let Him be my crutch as I walk through life, because I am wounded. I am the walking wounded. One of the expressions, I once said here that I'm not the first to make up, is that we're all broken vessels. We're all cracked pots, so to speak. And those of us who are saying, I'm not cracked, you're cracked, well, that's a lot of our society. But those who say, yes, I'm a broken vessel, and I'm striving to grow anyway, I'll try to help you in your brokenness, and if you could help me, at least, if not you as my friend, ask God for help with my brokenness, I will somehow limp faster than many people can race in a race car.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Presbytera. We are running out of time again, and I want to share one example from my life, and that will conclude. Is, as you know, when I got married, I had to go through stages of troubles, and very disturbingly, very sadly, everybody was surprised instead of being happy for it. And even the closest friends would say, "Wow, did you do that? Why did you do that way?" Instead of looking at me and saying, "How are you doing?" or "What is happening?" And I want to say that I was really broken from the outside influence. I almost came to think that I did wrong. I did something wrong. And what happened was, one day, Father Tom, I didn't want to mention his name, but...
my husband.
Yes. I called to his office. I was still in Montana, and I called to his office for something with my credits that I had taken classes with him. And he didn't answer the phone. I left a message, and after a couple hours, he called me back. And the first word he said, "Wow, I'm so happy I got a phone call from you, and I heard about your marriage, and I'm so happy that you got married. I'm glad that you chose that direction, and I'm very happy for both of you." And I had to let the air come out of me, and it's like, wow, there is one person. And it didn't heal me completely, but it showed that there is one ray of light that is gonna enlighten your way so you can get out of there. You know, there is one person who cares about you.
One word of truth.
Yes.
One word of truth can change everything.
Mm-hmm. Again, thank you very much. And thank you, dear audience. We all, as Presbytera mentioned, are broken vessels, and we all need help. And again, like you mentioned, that 500-pound phone is very important sometimes for us and for others. As we expect others to call us and say, "I'm happy for you," sometimes we need to call and tell others and pray for others and tell them that we are happy for them and we are next to them in their troubles and problems. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll continue if we have questions, more questions about love or another topic. Thank you very much.